Chapter 296 The Clearjade Sect. The Clearjade Sect was as mysterious as the Tang Sect. Since the start of the Continental Elite Youth Soulmaster Tournament, their progression through the elimination phase and the round robin's first match would be considered smooth sailing. Hardly any of their team members were hurt, and their team leader wore a conical bamboo hat with a veil that draped low over their face. The team leader had not fought yet, and had just been commanding and directing the battle from their waiting area. The Clearjade Sect only put 6 people on stage, even during the group battles, if not for the fact that their fighting style was very different from normal Soulmasters, who would have suspected that they were part of the Body Sect, who had planted themselves within the tournament. The Clearjade Sect consisted of soul engineers, and so were naturally all from the Sun Moon Empire. They were based inside Radiant City, and were a highly reputable group. The Clearjade Sect's disciples shared the same path as close combat soul engineers. They utilized close combat soul tools to boost their own strength, and even some of the Sun Moon Empire's representative team members couldn't catch up to these guys in terms of close combat techniques. However, the Clearjade Sect couldn't compare to the Sun Moon Empire's team with regards to soul tools, as the Sun Moon Empire's team had the illustrious Virtue Hall behind them. The Tang Sect versus the Clearjade Sect. This was going to be another epic match to watch. The spectators' grandstand beneath the competition was packed with people early in the morning due to the Tang Sect's dominant performance in the previous round. The spectators were already discussing the match among themselves. The Tang Sect was the tournament's darkest horse at the moment, so they naturally became the main talking point. They entered the guest lounge, and the pergola blocked off the light drizzle drifting down from the sky. The lounge was equipped with several soul tools that acted as heaters, and warm air wafted towards them once they walked in. The atmosphere was moderately warm and quite comfortable. The warmth didn't last long, however, and the Tang Sect's team members began to feel waves of chilliness coming from one side. The Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy's team, with Xiao Hingchen at the helm, was staring at them. Their eyes were like icy blades, as if they wanted to cut the Tang Sect's team open. Shu Sanchi shifted his mouth disdainfully, and he reached out with both hands and pointed his middle fingers. Xiao Hingchen's eyes closed into slits, and his right hand made a slicing movement across his neck. Losers, Shu Sanchi grunted contemptuously. He didn't look at them anymore and sat down with the rest of his team members. The Tang Sect's match was the first one of the day, since they won their last one. The Sun Moon Empire's team was pushed into the second segment. The Shrek Academy team had also arrived. Wang Qiu was still the one leading the pack, but their eldest senior sister, Zhang Wasun, was nowhere to be seen. Nobody knew where she had disappeared to. Donga will take the first bout, Huo Yua said with a faint smile on his face. Everyone looked at him in surprise. Huo Yua smiled again and said, afterwards, Xia will take the next bout. We will fight with our female generals today, and everyone will take 2 bouts if you can defeat your first opponent. We will request to enter the group battle directly afterwards. We haven't been fighting enough group battles since the start of the tournament, and our opponents will only get stronger and stronger. We'll take this opportunity to practice. Everyone couldn't help but laugh and smile as they listened to Huo Yua's words. It was clear that Huo Yua didn't think anything of the Clearjade Sect at all, and he treated them as target practice. His self-confidence came from his abilities. Even though Bei Bei wasn't there with them, they had still managed to force the Sun Moon Empire's team to admit defeat in the previous round. That outcome boosted everyone's confidence. Everyone came from Shrek Academy, and every single one of them were among the best soul masters of their respective ranks. It was within their rights to have such confidence. The Clearjade Sect's team members arrived at the guest lounge about that time. A man clad in a long robe and a conical bamboo hat on his head took point. Or rather, it was difficult to tell whether he was male or female. His clothes were wide and oversized, and big enough to cover his frame. This person looked extremely mysterious. Roughly a dozen people followed closely behind him. The main team members were positioned towards the front, while the reserve team members trailed at the back. The Clearjade Sect's team uniform was pale yellow in color. It was very eye-catching. The person walking in front of the Clearjade Sect's company paused for a moment and turned towards Huo Yua. Perhaps he could feel the Tang Sect watching them. An eerie and chilly aura rippled towards Huo Yua without any warning. The intimidating pressure was filled with a razor-sharp aura, and even the air seemed to tear and crackle faintly, as if it were being torn apart. A tall figure stood up in front of Huo Yua without waiting for him to react. This person was just standing there, but there was a feeling that he was about to split heaven and earth in half. This person's eyes focused and immediately dispelled the sharp aura that emanated from the Clearjade Sect's team leader. Sword intent surged through the air, and the entire guest lounge was immediately charged with hostility and murderous intent. There was no question that the sword maniac, Ji Juiken, was the person that stood in front of Huo Yua. They had been here for a long time, but both Jing Zian and he hadn't found anyone else besides Nanqi Pai to spar with. They were part of the Tang Sect after all, so they had to try their best to avoid causing trouble for them, but somebody was trying to provoke them beneath the competition stage. Ji Juiken couldn't hold himself back anymore, and the sword intent that had been suppressed for a long time erupted like a geyser. A peculiar scene appeared inside the guest lounge. Almost all the soul masters inside the guest lounge released their martial souls to fight back against Ji Juiken's sword intent. Sword intent continued to surge relentlessly around the room, and everyone felt as if they were about to be struck by this sword maniac in the next moment. Brother Ji. Huo Yua gently reminded him exasperatedly. Ji Juiken. A deafening shout rang out. Did this voice not belong to Xiao Hingchen? Ji Juiken, Jing Zian and the others had been following the Tang Sect before this, but Xiao Hingchen and his sister had been too focused on Huo Yua and the others this whole time. Furthermore, they weren't that familiar with Ji Juiken and Jing Zian. Xiao Hingchen finally recognized him after Ji Juiken unleashed his signature intimidating sword intent. Ji Juiken. You've deserted us and joined the Tang Sect. Xiao Hongchen howled as he gritted his teeth. Ji Juiken frowned, but said nothing. Jing Zian couldn't take it anymore, and retorted, you call that deserting? Can you not make it sound so horrible? We joined a sect after we left the academy. Are you saying that we were sold to the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy? What's happening? Withdraw your martial souls. Do you want me to disqualify the lot of you? A bright voice broke the tension, and the same person that had acted as judge for the match between the Sun Moon Empire's team and the Tang Sect that day appeared. The Class 9 Soul Engineer, the unbreakable Douluo. A powerful aura flowed from his body and forcefully suppressed all the tension and disturbance in the guest lounge. Teachers typically didn't enter the tournament's guest lounge. Therefore, everyone here was a contestant. Everyone became a lot calmer once the formidable titled Douluo appeared. Everyone withdrew their martial souls. Ji Juiken just glanced coldly at Xiao Hingchen before he sat down with Jing Zian. Xiao Hingchen's face was frighteningly dark and gloomy. His eyes were closed into slits, and nobody knew what he was thinking about. His black face was enough to portray the extreme rage and fury that he was feeling right now. The Clearjade Sect's team leader sat down as well, as if nothing had happened at all. He appeared incredibly calm and composed. Zhang Zan surveyed the guest lounge authoritatively before leaving. He stepped on the competition stage directly. He was the judge today again. Huo Yua frowned faintly. Is this titled Douluo, this Class 9 Soul Engineer, targeting the Tang Sect? It's him again. But he does seem quite fair. Time was up, and Zhang Zan's bright and crisp voice traveled to every corner of the arena. The second match of the round robin. The Tang Sect versus the Clearjade Sect. Contestants, please enter your waiting areas and prepare for battle. The single elimination round's first contestant can step onto the stage directly. Everyone from the Tang Sect stood up one after another. Wang Donga pushed Huo Yua, and everyone walked towards their waiting areas. 7 people from the Clearjade Sect stood up. 6 people surrounded their mysterious team leader as they proceeded towards their waiting area on the other side. The atmosphere immediately became tense and antagonistic once they left the guest lounge. Wang Donga opened her umbrella and sheltered herself, and Huo Yua against the light drizzle. Huo Yua turned his head around and glanced in the Clearjade Sect's direction. The Clearjade Sect's team leader seemed to be watching him as well, but their gazes couldn't meet directly due to the veil hanging from his conical bamboo hat. However, Huo Yua felt something in his heart. Both parties quickly entered their respective waiting areas. There were no archways to shelter them against the rain in the waiting areas, so everyone could only use their umbrellas. Wang Donga passed the umbrella to Na now before tapping on the ground with her foot and drifting gently onto the competition stage. The audience in the distance erupted into a cacophony when she leapt onto the stage. Everyone shouted different things, but they were all cheering her. It was clear that this powerful contestant from the Tang Sect, that had defeated 2 of the Sun Moon Empire's team members, wasn't welcome at all. Even though Wang Dong was still as handsome as ever when dressed like a guy, this still wasn't enough to offset the contempt the audience felt in their hearts. The first contestant from the Clearjade Sect was a short and fierce-looking youth. He wasn't fat or skinny, but he was only about 1 meter and 60 centimeters tall. His movements were extremely agile, but he seemed a little indecent. Both contestants quickly stood at the center of the competition stage, which had been repaired earlier, and faced each other. Zhang Zhan glanced between them both. He wasn't like other judges, and it felt as if he was trying to remember the tournament's contestants. He lowered his voice and said, "Report your names. Wang Dong of the Tang Sect, Yu Chen of the Clearjade Sect." Zhang Zhan nodded and said, "I'm sure you guys are clear about the tournament rules, so I won't repeat them again. But remember, this is just a competition, and it's not a fight to the death. Both of you have been raised by your parents, and you only get to live once. Whoever is out to kill his or her adversary cannot blame me for disqualifying you from the tournament. Do you understand?" "Understood." Wang Donga and Yu Chen acknowledged at once. Wang Donga had been observing her opponent ever since he stepped on stage. She could clearly feel the hostility in her opponent's eyes, and there was no question that this hostility stemmed from the previous round's result. The Clearjade Sect came from Radiant City after all, and must be friendly towards the Sun Moon Empire's team. But so what? Wang Donga lifted her chin slightly. She was taller than Yu Chen, and so it seemed like she was looking down on him. Yu Chen shot a cold look at her. He turned around immediately and walked toward the stage's other edge. Wang Donga turned around and proceeded to her own side. They widened their stride and arrived at their respective corners while they prepared for battle. Zhang Zhan raised his right hand high into the air. Once he could see that both parties were ready and in place, he swung his arm down forcefully and shouted, "Begin." Both of them began to move once his arm went down. Wang Donga tapped on the ground with her foot, and she seemed as light as ever as she charged forward. Her radiant butterfly goddess wings extended behind her back, while her soul rings sparkled dazzlingly at the same time. Pale golden light immediately covered her entire body. Wang Donga was a lot more careful today after the painful lesson that she had learned from the previous round. She would never give her opponent the chance to ambush her, no matter what. Yu Chen raised his arms from his sides, and 2 beams of light flashed by before a spike-like weapon appeared in each of his hands. 2 yellow and 3 purple soul rings rose from his body at the same time. The Clearjade Sect consisted of soul engineers, so Wang Donga wouldn't underestimate her opponent because of his non-optimal soul ring combination. Yu Chen's body and soul rings suddenly looked a little virtual. He left a trail of after images in his wake as he darted forward, and he covered several tens of meters with one step. What incredible speed! Surprisingly, he wasn't a soul engineer that focused on boosting soul power. He was an agility-type soul master. Wang Donga had ample fighting experience. She was taken by surprise, but that didn't slow her reactions at all. She tapped her left leg on the ground, and she spun in a circle as if she were about to dance. Her wings transformed into 2 huge blades and sliced towards the spikes in her opponent's hands, which were clearly soul weapons. Ding, ding. 2 bright, crisp sounds could be heard. 2 yellow circles rippled through the air, and Wang Donga accelerated in the next moment as her footwork became incredibly complex and mystical as she sidestepped Yu Chen's attack. Those with better vision realized that Wang Donga's wings had 2 small holes in them. She moved fast and tried her best to mask this fact, but it was clear that she was the one at a disadvantage in this collision. Powerful offensive capability. These spikes should make up his entire arsenal of soul tools. This is the mark of a true agility-type soul engineer. Zhang Zhan nodded lightly as he thought to himself. He was quite keen towards this contestant from the Clearjade Sect, who was developing down a very focused and singular path. Soul masters who wanted to become something had to display their greatest strengths in their entirety. This was the only way to stand out from the rest, the only way to become stronger. Wang Donga was also a little astonished. Her wings were tough, and in addition to her quick reactions, enabled her to push away those spikes in the nick of time. Otherwise, her opponent's spikes would probably have stabbed right into her body. Wang Donga had been defeated in battle before, but this was the first time that her martial soul had been damaged. Martial souls were part of a soul master's body, and it didn't matter whether soul masters had beast souls or tool souls. Injuries to a soul master's martial soul would undoubtedly affect the soul master's own body. At this moment, the soul power within Wang Donga's body became a little messy and disorganized. Wang Donga was full of admiration inside. It was just as Huo Yua had said. Every single team that could progress into the round robins wasn't simple at all, but this was the only thought that ran through her mind. Yu Chen was just too fast. His third soul ring lit up when Wang Donga sidestepped his attack, and his body seemed to split apart in the next moment as the after images that appeared from his incredible speed suddenly became material. His figure split apart into 7 identical clones that surrounded Wang Donga at the same time. Everything happened way too quickly, and Wang Donga had no chance to dodge even if she wanted to. She was surrounded and trapped just like that. But Wang Donga was a soul emperor, and she was a soul emperor from Shrek Academy. She wouldn't be amongst the academy's next generation elites if she was stumped by her opponent's speed. Wang Donga's 4th soul ring sparkled when her opponent and his shadows began to surround her. A beautiful yellow halo appeared on the ground with her body in its center. Wang Donga didn't move at all as her opponent and his shadows closed in on her, and she just closed her eyes, as if she were using her ears to listen intently to something. She placed her hands together in front of her chest at the same time, and a sphere of light began to condense. The 7 images arched inwards before they bounced out like lightning bolts. Yu Chen's reactions were quick. Indeed, right when his 7 images bolted out, a gigantic pillar of light that was over 2 meters tall rose into the sky with Wang Donga at its center, her hexagram array. This soul skill had formidable offensive and controlling capabilities, but it required her to predict her opponent's attacks and movements. She wasn't working together with Huo Yua for now, but she was still as powerful as she had always been. Yu Chen didn't seem like he could maintain those 7 images for too long. His 7 images bolted out and instantly collapsed back together, and it was then that he saw a blade of light that seemed to eclipse the sun sweep towards him. Wang Donga's 3rd soul skill, the butterfly goddess slash. Her butterfly goddess slash wasn't a concentrated attack anymore. It was separated into 108 light blades, and they were like an enormous web under Wang Donga's control as they rushed towards Yu Chen. Yu Chen retreated explosively. At a time like this, the only way he could avoid this attack was to move backwards. Yu Chen possessed incredible speed and outstanding offensive abilities, but his defensive powers weren't that impressive at all. He wasn't willing to risk being struck by his opponent. The truth was that Yu Chen resembled an assassin, and he was most adept with hiding in the darkness and erupting all at once to give his opponent a fatal blow. However, this was a tournament after all, and there was no way he could hide himself on the competition stage. He left another trail of after images as he dashed backwards at breakneck speed. Wang Donga didn't chase him, instead making a simple gesture with her hands, as if she were lifting something. Yu Chen had been monitoring her movements this whole time. Once she raised her hands, he nearly subconsciously bounced away diagonally like a fish. A golden pillar appeared in the path that he was trying to escape toward. It was another hexagram array. Yu Chen's reaction was quick, but Wang Donga's judgment was extremely accurate. This simple movement swept away 2 of his after images and caused Yu Chen's body to tremble. His aura seemed a little weaker than before, and then he looked on as Wang Donga's hands made another lifting gesture yet again. Hexagram array was a powerful offensive and controlling skill all at once. More importantly, it was a fearsome ability that could be released again and again. Hexagram array was Wang Donga's 4th soul skill, and it was a 5,000-year soul skill. It just didn't look like it on the surface. Yu Chen was taken aback as he watched her lift her hands once more, and he immediately lunged sideways. However, he could see the sly and cunning smile on Wang Donga's face as he pounced horizontally, and her hands suddenly paused in midair. In the next moment, Yu Chen could only watch as his body slammed into a golden beam that had just soared into the sky. A golden layer immediately erupted from Yu Chen's body without hesitation. He didn't dare let Wang Donga's hexagram array touch him. The Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy didn't have exclusive rights to use the invincible barrier. The Clearjade Sect had some too. He was immediately enveloped by her hexagram array when he released his invincible barrier. Yu Chen couldn't be bothered with his soul power that was being rapidly drained away. He tapped on the ground with his foot and unleashed as much speed as he possibly could. This time, he left 9 after images in his wake as he lunged directly towards Wang Donga. He wanted to use what little time his invincible barrier provided to give Wang Donga a series of his most formidable attacks. This was the only way he had a shot at victory. Wang Donga began to move when her 3rd hexagram array appeared. Her radiant butterfly goddess wings flapped vigorously and propelled her into the air. The light of the butterfly goddess burst out like a meteor shower and rained down toward her unbelievably quick opponent. At the same time, a heavy cannon appeared in her hands. A soul cannon. The silver-white cannon had very elegant lines, and its barrel was extremely large. The entire cannon was about 1.5 meters long, and the cannon mouth was a stunning 20 centimeters wide. Wang Dong carried it on her shoulders, and it seemed as if there were beauty in the violence. Yu Chen was exceedingly fast. Indeed, he tried his best to dodge the attacks of the light of the butterfly goddess as much as he could. With his invincible barrier activated, the light of the butterfly goddess naturally couldn't hurt him, but all those lights could greatly impede his forward momentum. He would be significantly slow if he allowed even one ray to touch him. Yu Chen could clearly tell from their previous few collisions that this six-ring soul emperor from the Tang Sect was incredibly powerful. Her soul power was more than one class above his own, and he would definitely lose this battle if he allowed her to regain her balance. His method was risky business, but it was clear that his invincible barrier was his last chance at victory. He was coming closer and closer to Wang Donga. He didn't hesitate any longer, and his fifth soul ring lit up as the two spikes in his hands shone with ghastly white light. The lights extending from the spikes were about half a foot long, and they were incredibly sharp as they whistled through the air. These were high-frequency oscillating blades, and they didn't possess any element at all. This attack relied on high-frequency oscillations for powerful destructive force, and was meant to counter Wang Donga's goddess of light's possession that she had used in the previous round. The Tang Sect wasn't the only one who was observing and analyzing their opponents. The Tang Sect's outstanding performance meant every single one of their opponents was also investigating and analyzing them. Yu Chen tapped on the ground with his foot, and 9 after images followed him as his fifth soul ring lit up and merged into his body one after another. Yu Chen's body seemed to become transparent in this moment, and he appeared to transform into a spectre while his speed increased explosively. His invincible barrier's radiance was raised to the highest possible level, and his body seemed to integrate into his spikes as he barreled towards Wang Donga like a lightning bolt. The spectral spear. His martial soul was similar to Nana's, but they weren't entirely the same. Nana's martial soul leaned towards avoiding physical attacks, while his martial soul took a different path. He used his martial soul to boost his speed and destructiveness. Yu Chen's fifth soul skill was his strongest attack, and even 7-ring soul sages wouldn't have a good time facing him head-on when he was using a pair of class 6 soul tools at the same time. Vigorous soul power undulations erupted around him in that instant, and the air around him seemed to tear apart as he pierced through it. Thin, delicate cracks appeared continuously around him. Wang Donga was faced with a threat so huge that her life was at stake, but she smiled. Yes, she smiled, and it was a very casual smile. Everyone could hear a vigorous explosion in the next moment. The heavy cannon on Wang Donga's shoulder exploded, and intense silver light detonated in midair. It was a shock bomb. No, more accurately put, this was a combination of a shock bomb and a rupturing bomb. The incredible force from the explosion hindered her opponent and pushed Wang Donga's body backwards like an arrow at the same time. The spectral spear's explosive speed was simply too quick. Even though Yu Chen was pushed back by the shock bomb, he was still a bit faster than Wang Donga's backward momentum from the soul cannon's recoil. He was about to catch up to her. Wang Donga smiled faintly as she retracted the wings behind her back. Black light flickered across her right hand, and a hammer appeared. This hammer was black all over, but it wasn't eye-catching at all. However, the entire atmosphere seemed to become a lot more solemn and heavier when this hammer appeared. A dark halo arose from beneath Wang Donga's feet, and she placed the hammer in front of her in the next moment. Ding! Wang Donga's body accelerated once more as she flew backwards amidst the bright ring from the collision. She quivered faintly before returning to normal, while the spectral spear's quicker stab was already over. The spectral spear's speed plummeted, and Yu Chen could only watch as Wang Donga flew out and distanced herself from him. What kind of ability is that? Twin martial souls? Yu Chen was dumbfounded, and there was nothing else he could think of. Afterwards, he looked on as Wang Donga's enchanting body spun halfway when she touched the ground, and she suddenly made a throwing action. The black hammer in her hands flew out as it rotated through the air and came directly for him. She opened her hands by her sides and made a lifting action at the same time. Yu Chen's invincible barrier was gone, and he had just used his fifth soul skill. This was an awkward moment. He had already completed his previous move, but he wasn't ready for his next one. He knew that there was no way he could win this bout. The only thing he wanted to do right now was to delay for as much time as possible, and to consume as much of this soul emperor's soul power as he could. Yu Chen wanted to evade this attack, but he realized to his intense fear that golden halos had appeared respectively on his left and on his right. These golden halos were 2 meters in diameter, and there was actually one more behind him. This also meant that he didn't dare to dodge to his left, right, or backwards in that instant. This moment of hesitation was all it took for that black hammer to arrive in front of him. Yu Chen had no other choice but raise his spikes and meet this hammer head-on. The corner of Wang Donga's mouth curled into a sneer. Wang Qiu isn't the only one who has strength. I'm strong, too. Boom. An intense explosion could be heard, and Yu Chen's body could be seen hurtling through the air. The hexagram array behind him surged into the sky as he flew backwards, and the array snatched him into its light and shot him up into the sky. Wang Donga's black hammer returned to her hands. 2 sharp spikes were impaled into the ground where Yu Chen was previously positioned. The Clear Sky Hammer, the #1 tool soul in the world. The Clear Sky Hammer was a pure strength type tool soul, and it had been ranked amongst the 6 most powerful martial souls in the world more than 10,000 years ago. The Clear Sky Hammer was Wang Donga's second martial soul, and this was where her true power lay. Yu Chen wasn't the only one who was astounded when he witnessed Wang Donga's Clear Sky Hammer and the black soul ring that appeared along with it. Huo Yuao himself was surprised. Even he didn't know that Wang Donga had added a soul ring to her second martial soul. She managed to defeat her opponent without using her Clear Sky Hammer soul skill. This was pure might. This was the might of a soul emperor from Shrek Academy. Stop. Zhang Zan appeared before Wang Donga in time to stop her from pursuing her opponent. Yu Chen was entirely under her hexagram array's control, and his soul power was slipping away at an alarming rate. While he didn't seem like he had a chance to struggle out of it, this bout was over. The Tang Sect is victorious in the first round. Zhang Zan announced this bout's result justly. He glanced at Wang Donga with an extra tinge of respect in his eyes. You're from the Clear Sky Sect? Zhang Zan asked softly. Wang Donga glanced at him. She had never been friendly at all towards anyone from the Sun Moon Empire. So, the Sun Moon Empire also knows about the Clear Sky Sect. Zhang Zan could feel her hostility. He felt a little exasperated as he replied. Why can't the Sun Moon Empire know about the Clear Sky Sect? I didn't expect to see the descendant of someone that I'm familiar with. I know somebody from the Clear Sky Sect, and he should be your senior. We'll talk about this after the tournament. Wang Donga's expression became a lot warmer and more relaxed when she heard that Zhang Zan knew someone from the Clear Sky Sect. She nodded her head as she took out a milk bottle to replenish her soul power. Wang Donga's victory in the first bout wasn't that easy. She was far stronger than her opponent, but she didn't like Yu Chen's abilities at all. Yu Chen was focused on extreme offensiveness, and the tables would have been turned if she'd made even a single mistake and allowed her opponent to ambush her. This was the reason why Wang Donga didn't want to give him any more chances. She was willing to expose her second martial soul to finish the battle as quickly as possible. Her hexagram array ended, and Yu Chen crashed to the ground. His entire body was scorched and burnt black from Wang Donga's fire of light, and he was in terribly bad shape. However, he didn't sustain overwhelmingly serious injuries, and he jumped off the stage after throwing a fearful glance at Wang Donga. Wang Donga didn't like his fighting style, but he didn't like her fighting style either. The hexagram arrays that could appear at any position gave him the biggest headaches, and this feeling was aggravated after he was enveloped by one hexagram array and had a taste of what it could do. He was in so much pain and agony that he wanted to die. The hexagram array possessed the formidable fire of light that could burn Wang Donga's opponents, and it also contained incredible restrictive capabilities. Finding oneself inside a hexagram array was like entering a marsh swamp. Yu Chen's cultivation rank was lower than Wang Donga in the first place, and it seemed like an impossible task for him to escape from her hexagram array. Next, Wang Donga turned towards the Clearjade Sex camp, and her eyes swept coldly towards their mysterious team leader. This fellow dared to stare threateningly at Huo Yuao. She had been bottling up her anger about this for a while now, and she would be more than happy if their team leader would jump on stage to challenge her. However, the Clearjade Sex team leader seemed exceedingly calm, and even the rest of his team were as such. They didn't seem very affected by their defeat in the first bout. The Clearjade Sex team leader sat still and didn't move. He didn't give any instructions at all, but someone else from the Clearjade Sex waiting area stood up and jumped on stage with a flash. Wang Donga was momentarily stunned when this person got on the stage. Her opponent's looks were a little strange. He had his head lowered this whole time, and he hid himself amongst his other team members and was very unassuming. However, it was clear that he could give anyone a lasting impression. This youth had pale white skin, and his face was also ghastly pale and without color at all. His entire frame seemed sickly and ill, and his hair couldn't be considered matted long. He used some special hair products to comb his hair into a swept back hairstyle, and his hair seemed shiny and reflective. His eyes were light brown in color, and they looked very cold. His body was a little hunched, and he was very tall but very skinny. His arms were especially long as they swayed faintly by his sides. This youth gave everyone an eerie and chilly feel from the moment he stepped on stage. This person wouldn't have to put on any makeup at all if he was seen in the Holy Ghost Church's camp. Zhang Zan stared at the youth from the Clearjade sect. Report your names. Wang Dongger of the Tang sect. Adler of the Clearjade sect. This youth had a strange voice. He was soft-spoken, and his voice was extremely sharp. However, he had a very masculine disposition, which was in contrast to the chilly and eerie aura that emanated from his body. Move back to your corners and prepare for battle. Wang Dongger wasn't in a hurry at all. She was still holding a milk bottle in her hands, and she was making use of this short period of time to replenish the soul power that she had expended before. Both contestants retreated to their respective edges and stared at each other across the competition stage. Wang Dongger's vision wasn't as sharp as Huo Yuao's spirit eyes, but her eyes were still relatively good. She realized to her surprise that Adler's eyes had become a different color when she gazed at him from afar. His eyes were originally an ice cold light brown color, but they were now completely red, and frighteningly so. It felt as if his eyes had been tainted with fresh blood in an instant. Begin. The unbreakable Douluo, Zhang Zan, swung his right hand downwards to announce that the match had begun. The contestants moved at the same time. Adler tapped lightly on the ground with his foot, and he soared into the air as if he didn't have weight anything at all. A faint red light emerged from his body as wings appeared behind his back. A martial soul that could fly. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.